Started. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on what, at least in Madison's pretty cold December night to talk about the rapid photography of Wallace W. Abbey. I'm here with Kevin Keefe. We co-authored a book about Abbey that was published by Indiana University Press in 2018. And this is the presentation we did at the Center's conference in Lake Forest that year, with a few tweaks since then, but pretty close to what we did for that one. And we're really happy to have the chance to share it again with everyone tonight as part of the Center's ongoing WebEx presentations, which we started back in April when after the world had changed. And even once things start to get a little bit more back to normal, we'll probably continue doing these in some form or fashion because so many more people can enjoy them. And we really appreciate everyone who's tuning in with us tonight. But just a couple of housekeeping things. If you're new to WebEx or need a refresher or just notice that it's made a few changes since the last time you used it, there's a circular or oval-shaped button in the upper right-hand corner of your main window, and that will allow you to make some changes to the layout of how your screen's displayed. You can toggle between a grid view or having just one speaker large. You can also go full screen with that. And within the full screen setting, you can even toggle back and forth once I start sharing my screen between whether you want the presentation to be big or Kevin's and my faces to be big. I would recommend you make the presentation big, but yeah, that's up to you ultimately.
Please.
We'll be happy to take questions at the end of the talk. You can send those to us. We prefer if you do that in the Q&A function. That's in the lower right-hand corner. Either you'd click that the caret button to get the drop-down and then be able to type your questions in there, or it might show up in the very bottom right-hand corner. There's a series of buttons there, and if you don't see it, click the one with 3 dots, and that'll bring up some more panels. If you have general comments for us or anybody else, feel free to put those into the chat section. But for those questions you want answered, it's just easier for us to find them at the end if you put those into the Q&A space. So that's really all we ask on there. And I think in the interest of time, we should go ahead and take this train out of the station. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and then I think we'll be ready to roll. Does that look good on your end, Kevin?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right. Well, so this is our talk tonight, Wallace W. Abbey, A Life in Railroad Photography by Kevin P. Keefe and myself, Scott Lothes. And of course, it is about this book that we published with Indiana University Press in 2018. It's a hardcover, 10 by 10 inches, 240 pages, black and white photography throughout. It's available on our website for $50 plus $5 shipping at a link. The link is railphoto-art.org/Abbey-book. And maybe Haley, if you could stick that into the chat, if anyone wants to click it, we'd sure be happy to get you a copy of this book. Although at this point in the year, I'm not sure we can guarantee it'll be there in time for Christmas. If you desperately want it, let us know when you purchase, and we'll see if we can expedite shipping. That may come at an additional cost more than the $5, but we'd sure be happy to get a copy of this book out on the way if you don't have it yet and would like one. I think Kevin's going to say a few words about our next slide here, and these 2 cute little girls waving at a Soo Line picnic train crossing the St. Croix River.
Well, those would be Wally's 2 daughters, Maggie and Martha. And Maggie lives in the Twin Cities, and Martha lives in Prescott, Arizona. She'll be happy to know that I pronounced Prescott correctly. She taught me to do that the other day.
I live in Arizona. They're very particular about that.
Yeah, that's what she told me. And I also just want to briefly mention that actually Martha and I are colleagues. We've been working together for more than a year on a Wally Abbey book that he wrote in the late 90s and never was able to quite finish. So we've been working on trying to finish it again for Indiana University Press, called The Diesel That Did It. And this is a history of the first EMD FT and the way it was introduced on the Santa Fe and then rolled out during and immediately after World War II. The book will be out, I'm not sure when they're going to come out with it, later in 2021 or maybe early 2022. We're about to hand off the finished book to them. So it's been great to work with Martha on this for the last year. So we're having a ball, and it's all Abbey all the time.
Well, and here he is.
There he is. There's Wally with his Rolleiflex, and I assume that's a shot taken during his tenure, probably at Trains, wouldn't you say, Scott?
Looks like he looks to be about the right age, and I think the
Yeah.
story went that he bought that Rolleiflex with an advance from his first paycheck from Kalmbach.
Yes. I think he was very grateful to Al Kalmbach to have the resources to get that camera because well, then he was off to the races once he had that thing.
Well, here's going back a few years. I think this is a college era shot.
Yeah, Wally was well. Wally loved music. I'm told he especially loved country music and traditional kind of honky tonk stuff. But he also sang barbershop, which is pretty obvious from this photograph. And that's Wally on the far left, looking quite dapper. And as we'll see through some photographs, he always looked rather dapper.
Even in this one.
Yeah, even in this one. I think you have the caption information. Do you, Scott?
Yes.
What
So
year
well, I don't have the exact year, but this would be late 40s in the Chicago area with his rail fanning friends Ted Cole and Chick Kerrigan, and I think they were making a little bit of an homage here to another photograph of some railroad photographers, Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg, who took a similar picture a couple of years earlier. And this photograph was in their book Mixed Train Daily, and I have to think that Wally and his buddies were referencing Beebe and Clegg with their group shot a couple of years after that.
That's the kind of thing Wally would think of for sure.
And here he is at Canal Tower in Evanston in 1948, Evanston, Illinois. He spent a few of his college summers working towers for the Chicago and Northwestern. And I think that really kind of informed his expertise in railroad operations, something that he always appreciated throughout his photography and his career, and it really informed a lot of his photography around railroad junctions, which were always points of fascination for him. And I don't know, Kevin, you want to say a couple of words about this one?
Well, we think he's on assignment for Trains, and I'll confess, Scott, I forgot to go look to see what kind of car that is. Somebody watching tonight out of our 197 right now in the audience. That's
right.
Maybe somebody recognizes that. I was thinking it was a Studebaker, but I'm not sure. It's a Dodge. But he's out in the field somewhere, and obviously he's got permission to use the railroad phone to call in, probably to see how soon the train's going to get there.
And the well-dressed rail fan in this shot.
Yeah, another shot, I'm guessing, at West Milwaukee. When Wally was at Trains, there were lots and lots of Milwaukee Road steam engines being decommissioned and stored under the 35th Street Viaduct in Milwaukee. So that's probably where he's standing, although I can't say for sure based on what little we see of the engines there.
And then, of course, on the opposite end of the apparel spectrum, here he is in coveralls out on assignment on the Union Pacific for a story about their turbines.
Yeah.
And one more from the ever fashion conscious.
Here we are, Wally in the go-go 70s polyester era. He's out on a high rail trip for the Milwaukee Road. Excuse me. Sorry. When he was a director of PR for the Milwaukee Road, and of course these were the dying days of the Milwaukee Road. So here he is out I'm guessing in Montana somewhere, showing us what everyone was wearing, including myself, I must confess, in the mid to late 70s.
I think this is one time I could safely say I was not born too late.
No.
But yeah, it's nice to have kind of some snapshots of Wally throughout his career. We'll get more into the details of that as we go. But after college at the University of Kansas, where he studied journalism, he spent a little bit of time in the newspaper world, and then was at Trains magazine, as Kevin said. A little bit of time at Railway Age, and then had two pretty long stints in railroad PR. First with the Soo Line, and then with the Milwaukee Road. Some consulting work in between, and he closed up his career at the Transportation Technology Center out in Pueblo, Colorado. And along the way, he left an incredible legacy of photography. About 23,000 black and white negatives comprise his collection, sizes ranging from 35 millimeter up to 4 by 5. Did most of his work in 35 millimeter and 2 1/4 medium format, as we saw with the Rolleiflex camera. And from that trove, we had to whittle down from 23,000 to 184 photographs that appear in the book. And we're going to tell you a little bit about how we tried to do that today, and look at some of the kind of the strengths of Wally's photography, how we tried to arrange things, some of the editorial choices we made as we put the book together. One thing we knew we had to focus on was Wally's attention to people, people around the railroads, whether they were workers, executives, laborers, passengers, just people watching trains. Wally really had a great appreciation for people around railroads. He said that people make the trains go, and few railroad photographs should be without people in them. And so this was something that we felt really strongly about including. These are just a few of some of our favorite Wally Abbey people photographs. Late in life, he put together an album of his 25 favorites, and he used this one for the cover of that album. It's a woman passenger in Albuquerque, New Mexico, framed up by these beautiful station arches with the Santa Fe's El Capitan passenger train in the background in 1953. And Kevin, I think you know this one pretty well.
Well, we led off the most of the book with this. It's the kickoff photograph in our introduction. I've always loved this photo. A lot of people do. It's a very haunting photograph. And it's just a great example of the kind of the serendipity that you take advantage of when you're a really talented photographer. So much of it is not just technique; it's just putting yourself in the right place at the right time. And the fact that the red cap is blurred and the elegantly dressed woman in the background has kind of turned around almost suspiciously to glance back at the photographer gives a sort of haunting quality to this photograph that I just love. And not to mention just all the hubbub of activity on the CUT platforms as the James Whitcomb Riley gets ready to head west to Chicago.
Yeah, Cincinnati, 1952 in this one. Let's see. There we go. And another shot from that same trip. This was probably the high water mark of Abbey's railroad journalism career with Trains magazine. Just some stunning work at Union Terminal. And as Kevin, you pointed out in our run through this morning, you can still basically take this same shot today, remarkably.
Yeah, it's almost the only one of Wally's from that era you can still take, but you get people dressed up with the right outfits, you can take that photograph.
This is in Milwaukee. 1950, that's the Peninsula 400 getting ready to head up to the North Country of Wisconsin. And what are we looking at here, Kevin, in terms of the scene?
Yeah, what's interesting about that photograph, if you've been to Milwaukee, is the vantage point you have here, you're looking to the northeast, out the corner of the train shed, and if that train shed was still there today, and you were looking in the same direction, you'd see looming in the background, if you're familiar with it anyway, the big white Milwaukee Art Museum edition designed by the famed Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava. So that museum building has become sort of the trademark for the city, and that's kind of maybe that orients you as to where you are in this photograph.
Yeah, not much trace of that left today.
Not a trace, really.
A couple more people photographs. This is Grover Odell working the tower at East Portland, Oregon in 1970. He was the regular night shift operator there. It's morning, and his last duty was to take down orders at the end of his shift for train number 18, eastbound Portland Rose. Abbey was out in Portland on a trip, and obviously got access. And again, he loved towers, and he loved the operations and everything that happened around them. So this was something he would have wanted to do and to visit. And it's a very similar composition to a self-portrait that Wally made 20-some years earlier, showing him working Wood Street Tower in Chicago in June of 1948. So another aspect of Wally's photography was his corporate work, particularly for the Soo Line and the Milwaukee Road as a public relations professional. And that was something that we wanted to tell, we wanted to tell that story in the book too. Wally had an interesting take on that, and that really gave us some great options as we started putting this together. This is very typical of the kind of corporate work you would have done. This is a new centralized traffic control installation on the Soo Line. This is a crystal tower just outside Minneapolis where the Soo crossed the Great Northern. And, this shot with the worker climbing the signal mast and lots of negative space, this is just perfect for his employer to use on their annual report or in their advertising or promotional literature. And, these are the kinds of shots they would have sent him out to take. But Abbey being Abbey, he was an artist, and he took this very shot on the same day. Nothing that he would have been assigned to do, but he saw an opportunity and he took it. We've got a Soo Line passenger train banging across the diamond here, while the Great Northern train waits behind an F unit out there in the distance. And Abbey got down low on the rails and used the wheels and the couplers of the freight cars to frame up the weighing F unit back there. And that's just a great example of the artistry of Abbey and the way he took advantage of the opportunities that his corporate work put him into. You know, a corporate hack out on an assignment would have taken the shots they needed to and stopped, but Abbey knew there was more to do and he had a great love to do it, and so he would always look for these kind of opportunities and really took advantage of the places he was. And to me, that's one of the real strengths in this photography collection and something that we came back to time and again through the book. And books need structure, and Kevin came up with ours, and Kevin, why don't you walk us through our table of contents here?
Yeah, Scott, when we first started working on this book, I think both of us were working under the assumption that this would be like a lot of, I don't know, salon coffee table books featuring photography, a rather long introduction, establishing some context at the beginning, and then lots and lots of big pictures occupying full pages with captions either there or at the back of the book. But Indiana University got back to us and really urged us, in fact, insisted that we come up with a narrative that would fill the entire book. They really wanted us to carry the story through from the beginning to the end, so that the photographs weren't just not kind of hanging out there by themselves. And so we quickly kind of reconfigured what we had planned, and we came up with 6 chapters, which was fairly easy to do. Once we looked at Wally's life, there were parts of his career that were less significant than others, but the ones that mean the most to us and the ones that meant the most to his work as a photographer conveniently kind of fell out into 6 classifications. So that's what these became. Each chapter was about 1,000 words, and the introduction that I wrote was maybe 6,000 or 7,000 words. So it's about 13,000 words, which is a fairly decent sized biography about a guy that, at least to us, was very important.
So we started, of course, with the introduction and that lengthy essay. And you want to give us an overview of what you were thinking for this segment, Kevin?
The introduction, well, it was very, frankly, Scott, it was very similar to things that I and other people have written for some of the other books. There's such a great story to tell about how railroad photography, the way we know it, really blossomed right after the war years. And I won't bore everyone with the same old story about all these master photographers who all of a sudden materialized out of nowhere, but Hastings, Shaughnessy, Steinheimer, all these guys, and Wally was right there with them. And so the introduction was an attempt to explain to readers, especially casual readers who may not be familiar with the story, to give them some context for what railroad photography meant, what was driving these people, what were their influences. Certainly there's a lot in there about Dave Morgan and Trains Magazine, because that was the place virtually every one of these photographers wanted to be. So that was the idea behind the introduction, to kind of answer the question, why Wally Abbey's photography? Well, here's why.
So for photographs in this section, we started out with some of Wally's older shots. This is in Cherryvale, Kansas in 1940, taken on a trip to visit his family there. And you can see, this is a raw scan. You can see there's some imperfections in it. That was not atypical from his early shots. And it also highlights another kind of hero of this book, and that's Photoshop and the digital restoration we can do with this. So we were able to spruce up this photograph a little bit, and a great shot of 2 trains meeting there in Cherryvale on the Frisco. Another photograph from Wally's early years that I just loved, could have been taken on the same trip. This was also 1940. But Santa Fe train number 12, the eastbound Chicagoan, arriving at Kansas City. Abbey shot this off the rear platform of train number 212, the Tulsan, which he would have caught that morning with his family on their way back from Cherryvale. Abbey was 13 when he shot this. He didn't have the best camera, but it's really a beautiful composition with great light and a great moment as the fully loaded baggage carts come clanking across the tracks, and the Chicagoan rolls into the station. And cars stream by on the overpass. You got the mail sacks on the far left there. Just a wonderful scene of railroading, and Abbey had great foresight to capture this. He went to college, as I said, at the University of Kansas, where he studied journalism, and he did some great work on the local railroad scene around there. This is an example of some of those college year shots, one of the Union Pacific's great big 412-2 locomotives near Lawrence, Kansas in 1946. And the introduction was also a place to pull in a couple of shots that we just loved, but that didn't fit anywhere else. This is on the Chesapeake in Ohio, White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, my home state, place near and dear to me. Didn't have a good place to put this anyplace else, so I had to put it into the introduction. I just love the backlit scene here with this is a westbound empty hopper train coming down into West Virginia after coming over the Allegheny Summit. Beautifully layered mountains off in the distance there. The signal cabin and the backlit rails, just a beautiful scene of Appalachian railroading, and one I was really happy to use. And this was also a good place to talk about some of the bigger themes in the railroad industry. You know, Abbey started out in the 40s and 50s when railroading was still, you know, kind of near its zenith in the U.S. Then it went through a couple of decades of significant decline in the 60s and 70s, and Abbey was there kind of at the midpoint of his career for all of that. And he took a lot of photographs that illustrated some of those hard times. This is on the Chicago and Northwestern out at Iroquois, South Dakota, taken about 1980 with the weed-grown tracks and the train order signals bereft of their blades and the depot looking like it's about to fall in on itself. And Abbey really captured some of these hard times in the industry, and it's another strength of his collection. But he was also there for the Renaissance that started, and you know, was there in the kind of for the trifecta of deregulation, the Powder River coal boom, and the shift to intermodal traffic. And here we have a Union Pacific piggyback train on Sherman Hill at the Hermosa Tunnels, taken about 1980. And Abbey was able to get some wonderful photographs of that side of railroading as well. And we wanted to make sure we caught the full sweep of his career and show some of these later images that you know showed that railroading was not going away. Well, Kevin, back to you.
Well, the first chapter we decided to go with was along the Santa Fe, partly because this went back to some of Wally's earliest experiences as a rail fan, but also because he was pretty unabashed about claiming the Santa Fe as his favorite railroad. Wally grew up in Evanston. Most people know that's up on the North Shore, which is, comparatively speaking, quite a ways away from the Santa Fe. But something about the Santa Fe really appealed to Wally, and he and his friends made a lot of trips down to the southwest side, down to the Loop, to Dearborn Station, and further out on the southwest side to photograph Santa Fe trains. And it led to a lifelong fascination with the Santa Fe. Of course, one of his great pieces that he did for Trains magazine during his tenure there was this long story that turned out to be called Super Railroad. It was a great profile of the Santa Fe in about the year 1954, I believe. And now, of course, his daughter Martha and I are working together on this book that's largely about the Santa Fe again. So Wally never worked for this. Well, he did work for the Santa Fe for a couple of summers in the engine shop down in Chicago, but that was the railroad he loved the most.
So as we go through the chapters, we'll look at some photographs that made the cut for the book and some others that didn't. One of the things that happens when you create some structure for a book is you always create problems for yourselves. You're going to have some photographs that don't fit in the structure, and then you're going to have some like this one that could have easily been in 3 different parts of the book.
Yeah.
Santa Fe, Chicago, or the Trains magazine years. This is this Santa Fe train banging across the diamonds at 21st Street, or 21st Street crossing in Chicago. So what section should we have put this photograph in? Well, the answer turned out to be none of the above. We ended up not using this photograph, not because it's not a great shot, but just because it's similar to some other views that we used elsewhere and that were better fits for their respective chapters. A Santa Fe Chicago shot that we did use in the Santa Fe chapter is this one. And here we see 2 sections of the westbound Chief, train number 19, coming out of Dearborn Station in 1952. And this really, to us, just kind of captures that zenith of Santa Fe rail passenger travel. 2 sections of the train. The first section here is flying flags for that, and really a great scene here at Dearborn, and something that Wally would have been excited to document. And here's another view that made the cut. Passengers boarding the Texas Chief at Oklahoma City in 1953. Abbey's focus on people and also speaks to the classiness of rail passenger travel at mid-century, from the stainless steel cars to the elegant clothes of the passengers. I don't think we dress up like this to ride Amtrak these days, do we, Kevin?
No, not anymore. But I remember growing up, my mother always, whenever we took a train trip, she insisted that we dress up. That's what she said. And so that's the way life was.
The Santa Fe chapter was also a place where we could include some steam photographs, which we wanted both for breadth of coverage and for the marketability that always comes with steam. This is a view of Santa Fe 3830 at Emporia, Kansas. It made it all the way to our final round of selections, but ended up just missing the final cut for the book. And you might be wondering why on earth we would have cut such a wonderful photograph, and it was a hard choice. But we ultimately decided to use this one instead, also taken at Emporia on the same day. You can even see the nose of the 3830 in the distance it left.
Yeah.
And given the scope of the book, we just couldn't run both of these wonderful views, and I really felt that this one, which includes more infrastructure as well as a worker, gets closer to the essence of Abbey's photography. It's a more complex and dynamic composition with lots of horizontal, vertical, and diagonal lines. This might be a more powerful locomotive photograph, but this, I think, is a better railroad photograph. And ultimately, Abbey was more interested in railroading than he was in locomotives.
Yeah, definitely. That's the great way to put his approach.
Here's one that didn't make the cut for the book that I kind of regret. It's just a wonderfully whimsical view of the Santa Fe mailbox out on a wagon wheel somewhere in the wilds of Kansas, and this would have made a nice little inset view or something in the book. So I'm glad we can at least give it a few seconds of fame on the screen right now, and it just shows Abbey's attention to detail when he was out on these trips. This one did make the book, and it comes with a little bit of a backstory. As we were saying before we got started, Abbey really documented his photography quite well in his early decades. But in his later years, I think when he was busy with corporate work and his family, he just didn't always have the time to get all of his caption information recorded. This shot came on a trip in 1970 as he was riding the Santa Fe from Los Angeles to Chicago. And that's all the caption information we had about this photograph. But of course, within our membership, we have lots of people who know a whole lot more about the Santa Fe than we do. So I sent this to our friend Joe McMillan. Joe took one look at that truss bridge and pinned down this location as Cork, New Mexico, where the railroad crosses the Rio San Jose between milepost 62 and 63. Abbey's aboard the combined Super Chief El Capitan, and they're meeting the westbound Grand Canyon. So thanks, Joe, for the assist with this one. And that takes us to the Trains magazine years, Kevin, which I think could have been an entire book by itself.
Absolutely, given his output and given the quality of his work. Yeah, this was an obvious one because even though Wally was only on the staff of Trains, I think for about 3.5, 4 years, they were very important. He just did so much work for Al Kalmbach and Dave Morgan. They realized early on that they had a real double, triple threat in Wally with his ability to go out into the field and report, come back to the office and write elegant stories, but also support it with great photography. So when we set aside a chapter about Trains, we knew we'd be able to get into a whole bunch of different stuff that he did that went beyond his normal personal interests. And so
here we get to some of those folks.
Yep, here's some of the people that we all know and love. This is a staff shot in, I don't know what year this is, in 52, 53. In Dave Morgan's office, and lots of things to look at here. On your left is Rosemary Entringer, the legendary, at this point I don't think she was managing editor. I think that was the title Wally had, but she went on to become the longtime managing editor. In the middle, of course, standing up is Wally, and over on the right is Katie McMullen, who at the time was the editorial assistant on Trains, but later went on to become an editor in her own right at Kalmbach. She edited a magazine called Better Camping. Al Kalmbach launched that in the late 50s to take advantage of the camping craze in America, and they sold the magazine after about 10 or 15 years to a company in Chicago. And then, of course, in the foreground, we have the great one, Dave Morgan. And I don't know what they're staring at, but you can see his Royal typewriter off to his left with something he's writing right there on the rollers. Right in front of him is his trusty package of Camels. And I cannot help but also notice the rather large photograph of Marilyn Monroe under glass on the desk. So if Katie and Rosemary were offended by the Marilyn picture, they weren't saying so.
Different world. And
Different world,
January of 1953, according to the Railway World calendar behind Katie there.
Oh, yeah, there you go. All right. With what looks like a British steam engine.
Yeah, sure does. Victor Hand could probably tell us the model if he were on here tonight.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at a few photographs from this series. This was a great chance to kind of expand the geographic coverage of the book, as Wally, as Kevin said, just went all over photographing the nation's railroads for Trains. This is on the Hudson River for a story that Wally did about the Erie. We have a tug departing Manhattan for a trip across the river to New Jersey in 1951. Abby's big story on the Erie ran in the May 1951 issue of Trains, and we ended up using 3 photographs from that trip in the book, including this one. We didn't end up using this one, though, of the tug captain, a wonderful portrait, but just not quite enough railroad context for us, but still a lovely image of the tugboat captain here. Here's another photograph that we gladly used in the book. This is Deshler, Ohio, in September of 1952. The Baltimore and Ohio's northbound Cincinnati and is disappearing on the right there, clearing the east-west main line while an eastbound train waits at the station. As I said, Abbey loved junctions. He loved photographing multiple trains at them, and that wisp of steam from the observation car's heating line really adds some nice atmosphere to this shot, along with the people on the platform, the B&O CPL signal there, and the Railway Express Agency sign really give us a great sense of time and place, and photograph we felt we had to use. Another shot from Deshler, taken I think on the same day, didn't quite make the cut for the book, but I'm sure glad to show it here. Another eastbound on the main line, not quite as dramatic as the previous photograph with 2 trains, but I do like the elevated perspective that shows you more of a distinctive depot there. There are just too many great photographs from Abbey's years at Trains magazine to run more than one of these 2 from Deshler. Now, one place where we had no choice but to use multiple photographs from the same spot was Abbey's Cincinnati Union Terminal coverage, which Kevin already mentioned, and was really a high mark in his work. He shot this in September of 1952, and it ran in the May 1953 issue. This view, which is in the book, shows a worker driving a cart in front of a New York Central Hudson locomotive number 5300, which had just come in on the midnight special from Cleveland. Abbey got up into the tower, got this wonderful view of the operator at his desk in Tower A, a place that many of us who have attended the summer rail show in Cincinnati may have visited on some of those trips in the past. We ended up using 5 of Abbey's CUT photographs in the book, although this one didn't quite make the cut, although I sure like it. We didn't use this one either, but it's a great view of the engine facility at Cincinnati Union Terminal, and it's fun to zoom in and see what all's sitting there. Of course, we've got the CUT diesel switcher in the foreground, and if we look more closely from left to right, we see a Norfolk and Western J-class steam locomotive at far left. Then we've got E units of the Chesapeake and Ohio, the Pennsy, the New York Central, and the Louisville and Nashville back there in the background. There's a Chesapeake and Ohio Hudson locomotive on the far right, as well as a couple of switchers, all in this wonderful scene. We did use a tighter view of those 3 E units lined up face to face, juxtaposed with a Buick that emphasizes the streamlining of the 1950s for both the railroads and the automotive industry. And this is a Union Pacific photograph that came from Abbey's first story from Trains, which he shot over Thanksgiving weekend in 1948, more than a year and a half before he went to work for the magazine. This is a westbound drag freight leaving North Platte, Nebraska, where Abbey was photographing their recently upgraded classification yard. And I love the dramatic steam and backlighting, but what really makes this shot for me is the 2 workers silhouetted in steam in the foreground. And here's another of those big UP 412-2s from that same trip. We didn't use this one in the book, but it sure looks nice here in the widescreen format on my monitor. And I'm really a sucker for these broadside views. We did use this one in the book. I love the interplay of the light and shadow and the silhouetted shot on the Peoria and Eastern, taken in 1952, and that was really the extent of Abbey's caption for this photograph. And I didn't know where this was, but I knew just who to ask, and that's our board chairman, Bon French, who grew up in Peoria, and he immediately identified this location as the Vermilion River, west of Danville, Illinois, and that's the recently abandoned Illinois Terminal Railroad in the foreground. So we thank Bon for the assist on that and some other places in the book. And Kevin, I think you might be able to say something of Abbey's kind of fondness of how the railroads modernized. I think his caption for this photograph was something along the lines of how diesels were allowing railroads to finally clean up their act.
Yeah, well, this certainly shows all the grit and grime of a locomotive roundhouse. I believe this is Cumberland, correct?
Yeah, this is Cumberland, Maryland, and the B&O in 51.
With one of their great EM1 2884 articulateds on the turntable. An engine Wally photographed quite a bit, an engine type, and so this would certainly be. I think this is the shot we went with, correct, Scott?
Yeah, we ran this one in the book,
Because there's
but
another
of course,
similar one coming up.
but because we didn't want to be too repetitive in our style, we then weren't able to use this very similar composition from the Soo Line up in Shoreham Yard in Minneapolis. Nice, another view looking out from the roundhouse of one of their FA locomotives on the turntable here. And again, for a little bit more geographic variety, this is a trip that trains sent Abby out to Denver for in February of 1953, and just a great view of the Denver station complex there with a UP switcher shuttling some head-in cars in the foreground. And then we have this shot of one of the Union Pacific 484s backing on to number 86, the eastbound National Park Special for Omaha, which looks like it already has one steam locomotive on it, so perhaps a double header heading east out of Denver on this train. And unfortunately, you can see the lights quite low, so Abby was not able to photograph the departure. The sun set too soon, but he did capture this wonderful image of the lead engine backing onto the train. And then, of course, while Abby was at trains, he did a ton of photography in Wisconsin, our own fair state here, including some great views on the Northwestern's Adams Line. This is up at Clyman Junction, just about an hour north of Madison. And that's a local crossing the main line on the branch line heading north for Fond du Lac. This is in July of 1952.
Behind an R1, one of the largest classes of engines on the Northwestern, and destined to come back to life in the not too distant future is number 1385 at the Mid-Continent Museum. So
that's right. Yeah, sister of the 1407 in this shot.
Yeah.
And some more just wonderful views from this July day up at Clyman Junction. Here we've got a meet between trains on the main line under the coaling tower, which does still stand, but of course all the infrastructure on the right's long gone now. And here's the conductor of the westbound train catching orders on the fly from his caboose. Here's an eastbound freight about to head under the coaling tower. A gorgeous shot of the westbound 400 coming under the coaling tower. And here's the eastbound 400 as the operator picks up something off the ground that they would have thrown off from the train. None of those last shots made the book. We ended up using a different image from the same day of 400 that included the operator in the foreground as the locomotives passed just before this shot was taken. Elsewhere on the Northwestern, Abby did some wonderful views up at Devil's Lake, a place I still like to photograph Wisconsin and Southern trains. This would be a westbound freight approaching the lake from up on the bluffs. And then west of Madison on a line that's long abandoned. This is the west end of the Madison Division in 1953, and I believe that is Montfort, Wisconsin, with their distinctive coaling tower, which does still stand, now beneath some gigantic wind turbines out in the cornfields there.
Yeah, easily seen from, I think it's Highway 18 as you head west toward Fenimore.
Yeah, no, I pass it frequently on my trips out to the Mississippi River for photography. And here's one more from this segment. We're in Milwaukee now at the Northwestern's Lakefront Depot, where a couple of young boys are watching the 400 passenger train making its station stop. And I have to reference our board chairman again, Bon French. I said he grew up in Peoria, but he did spend a few years when his family lived in Milwaukee. And he said he could have been one of these kids. This was about the age he was when they lived there. He had the same saddle shoes. And his dad, who loved ducks and duck hunting, loved to come down and watch ducks along the lakefront and take the kids out of the house on Sundays to give his mom some peace and quiet. And so they would come down and Dad would watch ducks and Bon would turn around and watch trains.
And just to orient people who may have been to downtown Milwaukee before, what if you were standing here now? Of course, all the railroad stuff's long gone, but what you would see in the middle distance, looking directly toward the southeast in this view, you'd see the Discovery World Science Museum, which is about just beyond that parking lot. And then over on your right, that vast open area, which includes a runway of a small general aviation airport that was there for a while, that's now the Summerfest grounds.
Right.
So it's very easy to kind of place yourself in this photograph once you know what you're looking at.
And what's up next, Kevin?
Well, next, it wasn't the next thing in Wally's career, but because he had a couple of different railroad public relations jobs after he left trains. But 2 or 3 jobs later, he ended up getting a position as the director of public relations for the Soo Line up in Minneapolis. And so this began a really important chapter in Wally's career. It certainly he did a great job, I'm sure, for the railroad as their director of PR. And as we explain in the book, he taught his management a lot of what it meant to practice contemporary public relations as he saw it. But it also obviously gave him a great opportunity to get a lot of great photographs, and also led to, I believe it was his first full-size book, The Little Jewel, which was his memoir, wonderful memoir about his years on the Soo Line, and in particular how they related to the Soo Line's diesel roster. So this was a chapter that was an easy call, and we had a lot of fun putting this one together.
No, there's no shortage of great work. He was there from 1959 until 1970, and the Soo Line was really kind of trying to beef up its game at this time. He did a lot of corporate work. This is kind of emblematic of that. This is Soo President Leonard H. Murray at his office in Minneapolis, shot in 1965 for an ad that ran in Railway Age magazine. I was actually more taken by what's in the background. That's a painting by Tom Thawell, a noted railroad artist who was kind of the face of EMD's advertising art for 20 years at this time period. He had this really distinctive style and gave a great presentation at our conference several years ago. Unfortunately, passed away a couple of years ago, but really, I think one of the greats in railroad corporate art. So it was just fun to see his work lurking in the background of this portrait. And of course, Abbey would have done lots of these grip and grin photographs for various corporate assignments. The occasion of this one is the delivery of some new General Electric U-30C locomotives in 1968. And in addition to this, he got the obligatory photograph of the class leader, number 800, posing on the turntable at the roundhouse at Shoreham Yard. But the great thing about Abbey, as I said earlier, he'd go off and he'd get the wonderful photographs that he'd been assigned to do, but he didn't stop then. And so when he had access to Shoreham and its shops, he'd wander inside and he'd find the workers and see what they were doing and get some great photographs of the repair work going on inside, showing kind of the gritty side of railroading that kept things moving, in addition to the clean, shiny new units outside. And he also had a chance to show off his sense of humor, how like this message written in dirt on the side of an F unit that Wally knew was not going to be on the roster for that much longer. Wash me before I am traded in, it says. And then the less glamorous side of railroading was also part of Wally's purview. This is a derailment at Plainville, Wisconsin in 1969. Abbey was very proactive with the press when it came to derailment coverage. He would let them know what happened, give them the details. And early on, that was very much to the chagrin of some of his superiors. When they challenged him about it, Abbey told them, if you don't want the press covering our wrecks, the solution is simple. Don't have any wrecks. Abbey's bosses backed off after that, and they let him control more of the narrative with the press, which is exactly what Abbey wanted. He covered all aspects of the Soo, including the transportation department's Plymouth Valiant, some of the wonderful state-of-the-art technology from the 1960s. How much memory do you think we have in this picture, Kevin?
Well, our cell phones are probably 10 times more powerful than everything you see in that photograph. That's what I'm guessing.
Here's a General Railway Signal wheel thermoscan unit, showing the readouts for the North Rail and the South Rail. And of course, the Soo was still pretty active in school tours at the time, both of their shops and their behind-the-scenes facilities, maybe showing off and inspiring some new computer programmers or engineers in this picture. And I tell you, no aspect of the Soo escaped Abbey's attention when he worked there, not even their bowling team, which he photographed at a Minneapolis bowling alley in 1961. And this photograph actually inspired our development director, Inga Velton, to make her own Soo Line bowling jersey that she wore for a Halloween costume at the office a couple of years ago. Nice little way to keep Wally's and the Soo Line legacy alive.
And just out of sight to the right, of course, is the Dude and Walter getting ready for the game too.
Yes, sir. I'm sure they're having a very cordial conversation.
Johnny.
Now, of course, the Soo Line was looking for second generation diesels in the 1960s, and so Abbey got to shoot a lot of the demonstration runs, like these two SD-45s leaving Shoreham with the freight train in 1967, getting a little help from a Jeep on the rear. And we didn't end up using these shots in the book, but we did use this one. And this is another of the SD-45s departing from Shoreham with a transfer run to St. Paul. And I thought that this shot told the story of the demonstrators, as well as also showing off some more of Abbey's creativity, and also let us work a night photograph into the book. Now here we have some General Electric U-25Vs that came out to the Soo Line in 1961. 3 of them were coming east of Boyd, Wisconsin, under the watchful eye of trains editor David P. Morgan. I actually used this photograph taken a few seconds earlier in the book, which de-emphasizes the train, and that's what I wanted here. To me, the story in this photograph is less about the new locomotives and more about the scene and Abbey's friendship with Morgan. The train's still there, but it's less dominating and more mysterious. I love the reflection of the headlight in the depot platform.
And I can't help but note that David is wearing coat and tie, no matter where he went, no matter what the circumstances. It seems like he always was in coat and tie.
Even in the pouring rain, out watching U-25s.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, the Arcola High Bridge over the St. Croix River at Somerset, Wisconsin was a favorite spot for Abbey. He caught a trio of GP20 demonstrators in this shot, the caboose of a westbound freight train in this one. I liked both of these, but ultimately, I picked this one for the book with new GP30s on westbound train number 25, which ran from Schiller Park to Shoreham. And I like this one because it had a dog watching from the riverbank, lots of dog people at the center, myself included, and so we had to work in a dog shot where we could, and it's still a great view from down at river level of the St. Croix Bridge.
It might also be worth mentioning, Scott, since this is the last picture, we should give credit to Wally, too, for his creation of one of the great paint schemes of all time. Certainly
absolutely.
One of the modernist paint schemes. I don't know what was driving this exactly, but Wally became aware, or maybe he was driving this, that the old maroon and gold paint scheme was out of date. And around 1960 or so, he started experimenting with some plaster models of locomotives to come up with some different ideas. And in the book, I call it it's just a name I came up with, but I call it the New Frontier paint scheme because I think it was very much part and parcel of the Kennedy era of around 1960, 61, a new way of looking at things. Very clean design, and his choice of Venus Bold Extended was the typeface, and it stood the test of time. It's one of the great all-time paint schemes, right up there with Canadian National and I think New Haven in terms of contemporary paint scheme that really had a lot of staying power.
Yeah. And we have some photographs of those models in the collection that Abbey used to come up with the paint scheme. So certainly if you're looking for some of that Soo Line history, we have that in the collection.
Yeah. So Chicago, that was another obvious chapter for a couple of reasons. One was just, anytime you do a railroad book, if you can do something on Chicago, that's a good idea. But also because Wally was a Chicagoan and lived much of his life there. In fact, returned there later in life, as we'll see when he went back to the Milwaukee Road. And we also emphasized mostly the pictures he was taking at Chicago in the late 40s and early 50s when, as we imply in the title of the chapter, Chicago as the railroad capital was at its zenith.
Right.
There were a lot of great eras of railroading in Chicago, but for us in this time and place, it's hard to beat what Chicago was during that era that Wally was out shooting.
Yeah, so we had no shortage of great photographs in this. Trains sent Wally down to 21st Street Crossing for a 2-day assignment in October of 1950 just to shoot everything that came through there. This is a very busy junction just south of the Chicago River Bridge coming out of Union Station. 2 Pennsylvania trains meeting in this photograph, passenger and freight passing in this one. The Monon coming through. I think this is their thoroughbred train heading down to Indianapolis. I'd have to check my official guide to be sure of that, though. We didn't end up using any of these photographs, though. This is the one we ultimately used, and it shows it's kind of the most, the least glamorous, most workaday with these Illinois Central switchers leading a transfer run across all those diamonds. But I love the convergence of the tracks in this particular composition. You get the entirety of the bridge over there and left, the factory buildings and bridges kind of spanning off on the horizon. I mean, I really felt if I had one photograph to really tell the story of 21st Street Crossing, I felt like this was it. So this was the one we put in the book. And you can't say Chicago without the L. And here we have a wonderful street level scene taken at Monroe and Wabash in the late 50s. This was on assignment for Railway Age. And we
Yeah.
found some real gems in the collection too. Some things that may never have seen the light of day before. This is an Abbey photograph that I can't recall having seen previously. And this is at Canal Street on the Northwestern in 1951. We've got a pair of Northwestern E units bringing in the San Francisco Overland while the suburban train steams away for the northern suburbs, right? Over at Dearborn Station, a pair of Grand Trunk steam locomotives getting ready to depart from there. You know, again, really kind of speaking to that railroading zenith of Chicago at the time. Up on the north side, this is a Canal Tower in Evanston with the Northwestern Train 401 blazing by up above and traffic on Green Bay Road down below in 1948. Here's one that I didn't use in the book, and I should have. I regret not putting this one in. This is on the Illinois Central's commuter service from Chicago down to Richton Park, and it shows IC commuters in 1958, and I just love that composition, looking through the handholds at the packed standing room only passenger car. We also had a bit of a conundrum in this section. In 1965, Abbey made a trip in October. He got on the Hiawatha in Minneapolis, rode down to Chicago, and did a couple of days of very intensive photography, showing all of this kind of really grit of Chicago railroading in the 1960s. This is a Pennsy train at 21st Street, having just left Union Station. He got over to LaSalle Street and caught a Rock Island train pulling out. Some piggyback cars there ahead of the passenger coaches. 20th Century Limited leaving LaSalle on the New York Central. And you know, Abbey didn't make too many dedicated railroad photography trips like this later in life, so this was a real exception to that, and some incredibly strong work. But you know, the challenge we had is that the industry had visibly changed for the worse in the decade that had passed since Abbey did a lot of his great photos in Chicago in the 1950s. You know, I mean, we're trying to clean off this Burlington E unit here, but it's a little worse for the wear at this point. Down in Inglewood, Abbey caught some great action down there, but again, you know, it's a grade A and kind of fitting the state of the rail industry by this point. Although some high points too, like these new Cadillacs on an open auto rack on the New York Central's Inglewood yard. And here we have the Golden State Limited, a joint Rock Island and Southern Pacific train rolling into the station. Some great scenes on the platform there. Cook peering out for the dining car. And a photograph that just, I think, kind of encapsulates this era of railroading, this exhausted passenger sleeping on a station bench. And so this is just wonderfully evocative journalism, but ultimately we didn't feel like these photographs really fit with the theme of Chicago at its zenith. So as strong as this work is, we only used a couple of photographs from this trip. We did use this one, another chance to include some freight traffic in Chicago. That's a westbound Illinois Central train coming off of the St. Charles Airline. And this one got me into trouble because the caption for this photograph in the book is wrong. In the book, I called this train eastbound. And unfortunately, we did not catch this in proofreading. Bond French, our chairman, called it when I sent him a copy of the book. And I had been looking at photographs in our collections from another photographer, also taken, but at the other end of the airline, where a train coming down would have been eastbound. And so I got myself confused, and we didn't catch it. So I think we call that an occupational hazard of caption writing, Kevin.
Well, the perfect book hasn't, as Dave Ingalls used to tell me, the perfect issue hasn't been done yet, and that's the way it'll always be.
Yeah, leave something for next time, I guess.
Yeah.
Here's a great view that to conclude the Chicago chapter with, and this is really what we wanted to showcase in this chapter. Just that just wonderful cacophony of Chicago railroading. This is really the premier train of the times and the place. That's the 20th Century Limited departing for New York on a glorious summer afternoon. Meeting a Rock Island train coming into LaSalle Street Station, and switchers working on two adjacent tracks. Just kind of really encapsulates that notion of Chicago at its zenith.
Next chapter, Class by Itself, focuses on Wally's love and appreciation for the EMD FT diesel. and its various iterations on some other railroads. One of the things that really excited Wally most in his years before going off to college was the arrival of the FT on the Santa Fe. And that translated into an interest in sort of following the fortunes of that particular engine in the ensuing years. So we have some nice photographs here of FTs on other railroads as well as the Santa Fe. And of course, this experience also helped lead Wally to do the book that we're working on right now for IU Press about the FT.
Yeah, and Wally really reached out to pull in some great work for a lot of different photographers that he wanted to showcase in that book. He got some wonderful photographs of the FTs himself, but this section would have gotten a little bit repetitive had we not cut it short. So this is the shortest chapter in the book.
Yeah.
This is a special train for a school trip at Chanute, Kansas in 1950 on their way to Kansas City. This is a westbound train on the Northwestern at Elburn, Illinois in 1949, and I just love this view looking down the street, the big trees overhanging, the homes and buildings on both sides. So really a nice crossing scene. And then this shot was just a no-brainer. This is Rochelle in 1948. That's an eastbound train on the Northwestern. I think Wally climbed up on the home signal here for this elevated view before the train crosses the Burlington just ahead, one of the famous railroad crossings in the Midwest. And there's so much to love about this shot, but I'm really a sucker for these two vanishing point perspectives. I took art classes in high school, and we draw perspective drawings, and I really love the 2-point perspective drawings. So I love to find these in our collections and try to take them myself. And here we've got the FTs on the main line flying flags, and the car waiting down at the swinging wigwag crossing signals, and that cornfield in the distance. That's a Global 3 intermodal facility now. So a view that's changed greatly in the time that's passed. And a great portrait of an engineer, also taken aboard an FT locomotive, and a good chance to have a little visual variety in this chapter and refocus Wally's love on people. We had a close call with this shot. It's a wonderful view taken at Maybrook, New York, with some New Haven power at left and New York, Ontario, and Western F units at right. But of course, those are not FTs. Those are F3 locomotives at right. And so as much as we like this composition, we had to cut this one, and we did at the last minute when thankfully, I think Rob McGonigal in proofreading alerted me to my diesel spotting mistake here, and we made a very last-minute swap for this shot, showing a quartet of Erie FTs. Not as strong of a composition, but at least it kept this factually accurate in this case. And I think that takes us into our last chapter, Kevin.
Yeah, this was not the end of Wally's career in the profession of public relations, but it was certainly one of maybe the most exciting for him. Not always in positive ways, but in the 70s and early 80s, Wally moved to the Milwaukee Road and became their director of public relations, and was there to preside over corporate communications during the era that Milwaukee Road was proceeding into bankruptcy. So, you talk about a challenge for a PR man. This was a real difficult one, because not only was the railroad continuing to function in some way as a railroad offering, common carriage transportation, but it was also fighting in the court all the time for its fate, over its fate. And Wally became very much a right-hand person, not only to Milwaukee Road management, but later to the receivership management led by former Governor Ogilvie. And in that sense, Wally went beyond his job description as a public relations professional and really became truly a railroad executive.
His photography in this segment pulls from his photography kind of over the course of his career, not just during his time at the Milwaukee Road, but we pulled in a lot of Milwaukee Road shots. This is kind of, I think, what a lot of us, as railroad enthusiasts think of when we think of the Milwaukee Road, big freight trains out west. This is on the electrification district, although the wires are gone, and we've got remote-controlled diesel helpers in the shot here, but heavy trains on mountain grades. But the truth is that Abbey didn't make that many trips out west of the Milwaukee Road. His big one came in 1979 when he made an inspection trip by high rail with bankruptcy trustee Richard Ogilvie. That's their high railer on the left heading east, meeting a westbound Milwaukee Road train at a siding out along the line. We used one photograph from that trip in the book, and that's this one, which is just this wonderful composition. Abbey was sitting in the back seat, and he used his pipe-smoking driver to frame up this shot of a westbound train approaching, and I just had to use this. I love that composition. But ultimately, the West was not Abbey's Milwaukee Road. Abbey's Milwaukee Road was in the Midwest. And so this is the photograph we use on the cover of the book. That's the morning Hiawatha making its station stop at Milwaukee in 1951. The beautiful tower of the station standing in the background. The clock says it's 1:35 p.m. So this train's just a couple of minutes off the advertised, and you can bet they would make up that time before they arrived at Union Station in Chicago. The back of the same train with one of those beautiful skytop lounge cars. And we didn't use this photograph in the book. It's not as strong of a composition, but it sure is a wonderful collection of equipment under the train shed there at Milwaukee. Kevin, you want to say about anything about the location here? And we've got the later photograph coming right up after it.
Well, of course, everything in this picture, practically except a couple of the distant office buildings, are gone. Standing where Wally is standing in this picture would probably put you right in the middle of Clybourne Avenue, which is a main one-way, four-lane street heading west. And right above you would be towering the bridges of the Interstate 794 extension. And in the middle distance, where the train station is in this photograph, is now the big brutalist office building of We Energies. So still a lively part of town with a lot of development going on, but I would prefer this.
Yeah, this was 1951, and even by 1965, things were changing. The tower's gone from the depot, and the tracks are looking a little worse for the wear as automotive traffic now predominates.
Yeah.
Further west in Milwaukee, up the Menominee River Valley, this is the engine shops in the early 1970s with a great collection of power. And is that Milwaukee County Stadium in the background at right there, Kevin?
Yeah, that would be, depending on what year this was taken. I don't.
Early 70s. I don't know the exact year.
Yeah. Well, the Brewers are probably in town by then. The Brewers arrived here around 1970. So yeah, that would be the home of the Brewers in the background. County Stadium, originally built in 53 or 54 for the Braves. But and of course, Miller Park, today's Miller Park, is just to the left in this view.
Right. So we didn't use this photograph in the book. We did use this one. I loved it for the strong composition, almost an abstract quality, kind of focusing on the circular shape of the turntable pit, and all those diagonal lines of the garden tracks, and the really wonderful contrasty lighting falling across the Fairbanks Morse switchers and the 1F unit back there. And then Wally did spend some time up on the Milwaukee's beer line, which heads north into the brewery district up there and served the Schlitz, Blast, and Pabst breweries. And his photography was so good from there and such a popular topic that we actually put together a traveling exhibition about the beer line. You can actually find a talk we did about that also on WebEx. That's on our YouTube channel. That John Kelly is the author for that, and does a really wonderful presentation about kind of the history of the beer line. And our exhibitions coordinator, Haley Page, put that together. Haley's on tonight, and she arranges all these programs, and we sure appreciate all of her good work behind the scenes. She originally hails from Cedarburg, Wisconsin, which is the location for this photograph. This is the Chippewa Hiawatha stalled by engine failure on New Year's Eve, 1953 in Cedarburg. The Milwaukee Road loved those Fairbanks Morse switchers for the beer line operations, but they did have some trouble with their road power, and that was the case on this particular night. Other troubles on the Milwaukee Road led to some opportunities for Abbey. He took this shot while he was working for the Soo Line in 1969. This is on the Soo Line, crossing the St. Croix River, but that is the Milwaukee Road's Hiawatha detouring over the Soo, probably because of the derailment somewhere on the Milwaukee itself. This is just over at Grand Crossing in La Crosse, Wisconsin, crossing the Burlington, Milwaukee Road eastbound train in this view. And a couple of views to close out this segment at Libertyville, showing the Milwaukee Road's commuter service. We didn't use this photograph in the book, but we did use this one, which has some wonderful backlighting Abbey was enjoyed playing around with the fisheye lenses that became popular in the 1970s, and I wanted to work in a couple of those to show his creativity. And I thought this one really worked well with the fisheye perspective and the backlighting to kind of capture the rush of that 1970s commuter traffic. And so that takes us through the main sections of the book. We have a brief epilogue, and we'll be happy to take questions and say more about Wally in a couple of minutes here. But I know we're a little bit over time, but we have just a few photographs here at the end that didn't quite fit the scope of the chapters of the book, but we just still really liked them. And so we've got just a few of those that we're going to close out here with. And this is a view of the Algiers, Winslow, and Western in Indiana, taken in 1972. North Shore Mining in 1968, up on the Iron Range of Minnesota. Some RDCs in the Hudson Valley at Skill, New York in 1970. The South Shore in Michigan City, Indiana. Again, showing some of Wally's focus on people. Northwestern Jeeps along the Mississippi River in St. Paul in 1968 at that wonderful Robert Street lift bridge. And a train order shot I just love. This is at Summit Station on Marias Pass, taken from the Burlington Northern's Empire Builder in 1960, and it sure looks to me like the agents just come out of his igloo to hoop up those orders in this shot. Portland, Oregon in 1970, crossing the Steel Bridge over the Willamette River. A couple of views of Cajon Pass taken on that same trip in 1970. I think Wally did a big trip, mainly by train, to get in some of the last of the private passenger service before Amtrak took over the next year. There's a freight at Cajon Pass. I love this shot of the Northern Pacific exchanging mail bags at Hawley, Minnesota in 1965 between the Branch Line RDC and the train on the main line there. That's either the Main Street or the North Coast Limited. This is Chicago Great Western Train 14 in from an overnight run from Omaha. This is at the Great Northern's Minneapolis station in 1965. This is also Minneapolis crossing the Mississippi River in 1967. And we'll finish it up with a couple of shots from a run up to Duluth, where Wally rode with Great Northern Railway Post Office crew in 1967 and got some wonderful shots of the mail handling and sorting that happened on board. And we'll conclude with this image. We're pretty sure this is the Great Northern Station at Duluth. And Orrin Hellbach some time ago, and I think Orrin's on tonight, he compared this to David Plowden's wonderful photograph of the Lackawanna's Phoebe Snow stopping at Scranton. There are, I think, some compositional similarities, the wonderful lighting and the figures kind of in silhouette there. You can see a little bit of steam and atmosphere coming in from the side lighting in the distance, and really shows Abbey's artistry of capturing an everyday moment along the railroad and doing it very artfully and creatively by being in the right place at the right time, thanks to the wonderful access he enjoyed from the railway industry. So what a treat to get to go through Wally's photographs and share them with you tonight.
Yep, definitely.
And we'll be happy to take any questions. We'll be posting this show onto our YouTube channel, and you can see all of our previous shows there as well. And you can also buy the Abbey book if you don't have it already. That's at the URL down at the bottom there. And Haley, I think, can share that in the chat, so you can click away. So thanks everyone for tuning in. And if you have questions, we'd sure be happy to take them now. Kevin, what do you think is the greatest legacy that Abbey's left behind for us?
Well, I would say it's photographic. He had such a varied career. There's a lot of things that he could be proud of. Certainly, he raised a great family and he provided for them with a great career in public relations. He was a great writer, but I think the photography is what will probably endure the longest. I think he's really right up there with the other masters of the era. Maybe not quite with the consistency of a Shaughnessy or a Hastings, but right behind him. And when he was on target, when he was on his game, he was as good as anybody. And I think we saw that tonight in some of these photographs. Wally's pictures, depending on the subject, hit me like nobody else. And he was, and of course, I went to journalism school, and so I always felt a certain little bit of camaraderie with Wally in that sense. So I think I know a little bit about what the instincts were that were driving him. And he was a journalist as much as he was a photographer, and I think the two really come together in what we've seen tonight.
Well, let's see. Dick Gruber asks, you, Kevin, did you ever meet Wally? Hi, Dick.
Yeah, I did. I'm a lot younger than Wally was, and in fact, I didn't even really know much about Wally when I began reading Trains magazine in the '60s because he was on to his industry career. But I did see this occasional, Abbey photo credits showing up, and it was by the early '90s when I was working at Trains, then I began to know all about him. And it was only when he left his job at the Transportation Test Center in Pueblo that he sort of got back in the game of doing freelance writing. And so that's when he proposed doing an occasional story for me at Trains, which was great. I mean, to get an invitation, to get an inquiry from Wally Abbey was like, yes, how soon can you write it, So we did a couple stories by Wally, and I was privileged to meet him at a couple of Lexington group meetings in Kansas City, and for certain one in Fort Worth, and we had a ball. He was just a great guy. We had a good time over some beers and some great steaks in Fort Worth, and it was a very memorable evening. And the more I got to know him, the more I kind of started writing him personal notes just to try to pick his brain a little bit more about what the Trains years were like for him in the early '50s. So that was a lot of fun.
Well, we got lots of questions coming in. Let's see. Joshua Liss asks if Walt only worked in black and white. And he worked primarily in black and white. He did take some color photography. We have maybe a couple thousand slides in total. But I think he did his most creative work in black and white. And, I see that across the board in our collections for photographers who worked in both, especially the ones who started out in black and white. And this might not be a popular stance, but I'm kind of the opinion that Kodachrome set back railroad photography's creativity for a while. Kodachrome was just so unforgiving. It was spectacular when you had the conditions just right, the exposure just right, but otherwise it was a challenging film to work with, and I think it limited people's thinking and what they were able to do. And Wally's his color photography is certainly competent. Sometimes it's quite good, but really his artistry comes out in his black and white work, and there was far more of that. So that's really what we wanted to showcase in the book tonight, and in all the presentations. Let's see. Kevin, Mike Mateka asks. This is one you might be able to respond to. Mike Mateka just makes the comment that people aren't always comfortable being photographed. Yet Mike makes the point that it seems that Wally always put people at ease in his photographs. And can you say anything about Wally's personality or his working style that would have allowed him to do that?
Well, I'm only guessing here. I have to guess because I wasn't around when he was doing this, of course, and I don't remember us actually talking about his approach. I think we were talking about other stuff when I got to know him a little bit. But from what I know about his personality and what a kind of an ebullient, exuberant kind of guy he was, I'm sure he was very good at disarming people, probably in a different way than John Gruber did. I mean, John Gruber obviously was a master at disarming people in a different sort of way. And we all know John's, I think we know that John's method generally was to shrink into the background. It's hard for me to believe that Wally did it that way. I'd rather believe that Wally was pretty upfront about people and saying, hey, look, I'm going to do this. Is that going to be okay with you? And he was the kind of person that put them at ease. That's my guess.
Sure. Well, Steve Lashinsky, and hi, Steve. Steve makes the point that he met Wally when he was 16 years old, when Steve was 16 years old at an NRHS meeting, and that Wally could not have been nicer. So that certainly speaks well to his personality.
Well, and he was even nice to Glashinsky, so that shows you how nice Wally was.
You two know each other for a while, I think. Now, Steve's a great friend, and certainly does some great work up in the Twin Cities area, where Wally did some of his best work.
Right.
Steve wonders if we'd ever consider doing another collection or another book of Wally's work, since the collection is so vast. And we don't have any immediate plans for that at the center ourselves, not because the subject isn't worth it, but because we've since acquired several other collections that we also think are quite worthy of at least one book. But I know, Kevin, you and one of Wally's daughters are at least working on the FT book right now. And
Yeah,
when's that
well,
due out?
well, I'll have to ask Martha later tonight in an email. I think it's the earliest would be late 2021 and probably early 2022.
Okay,
We haven't even given them the book yet, but we're going to do that soon, and then it'll take a few
sure.
months for them to get through their editing process. It's called "The Diesel That Did It." We chose
Mhm.
the title. That's the great phrase that Dave Morgan came up with to describe the FT. And it's going to be I think it's going to be in the 10 by 10 format of the book that we talked about tonight. So it'll not only have 50,000 words by Wally that really tell the story of the EMD and the FT, but also they'll be in a format that really shows off his not his photography so much, but all of the great pictures he collected for the
Sure.
book.
Well, Larry Perlman asks, well, he mentioned he loved the photos at Dushler and of the Midnight Special at Cleveland, and he asks how we determine when a little bit of motion blur gives you a sense of movement versus just a blur, noting that the instinct of most photographers is to really try to freeze the moment. And I'd say it's subjective, and I do agree that sometimes when there's a little blur but not enough blur, it does just look like a blurred photograph and not something that's evocative. So it's a subjective part of editing, and in some cases I think Wally was intentionally using a slow shutter speed to blur his photographs. In some cases it's probably the fastest shutter speed that the conditions would allow. But yeah, that's one of those things that photographers have to work with, and I do think, I don't know if I can. That's probably not worth sharing my screen again. But like the photograph at Deschler of the Cincinnati and disappearing with the steam coming off, there's just a little bit of motion blur in that shot, and I think that's a place where it works well. And then, Kevin, you mentioned the photo of the red cap, where the red cap is blurred, and I mean that's a case where a little bit of blur really adds an ethereal quality to an image.
Yeah, I got to believe that in that moment, Wally wasn't thinking, "Oh my goodness, he's blurring. I'm going to get this." He didn't have time to think that way, but
Right.
he certainly was. He had lightning reflexes, and the fact that the guy is blurred, but the woman behind him is not, gives it a really interesting, I don't know, almost Vivian Meyer kind of
Hmm.
intimacy that makes it such a striking picture. And we didn't mention this earlier, but not everyone would agree, but I love that photograph so much. That was one of the pictures that I wanted to include when the train staff 20 years ago did this 100 greatest railroad photos special. And we had a team of about 6 or 7 of us associated with the staff who went through, scads and scads of photographs, trying to narrow it down to the 100 best. And we had a lot of arguments and maybe some disagreements about what made the final cut. But I think everyone agreed that that was worth it because it's
Hmm.
just ethereal. It really is a magical photograph.
Hmm. Well, and actually, we got a question and an answer that came in different in different places here. Let's see if I can find the question originally. I'm sorry, I saw the question. Oh yeah, David Maney, David, whose collection we also are in the process of acquiring. He's done some wonderful work from up in the Northeast. And David asks if Wally developed his own film, and Martha Miller, his daughter, who is tuning in tonight, said that she spent hours with her dad in the darkroom in their Minneapolis basement. That he was an artist, his ability to get the most out of his black and white negatives, and I certainly think she's right about that for the prints of his that I've seen. Um, and let's see, we also had a question from Robert, and Robert, I'll probably mispronounce your last name, but Lalich asks if the Abbey collection will be made available online. We actually do have a selection available right now, and I'm putting a link for that out in the chat. We have a brief bio of Wally there, as well as some highlights from the collection. We do plan to add more. We've digitized the entire collection, and recently went back through and did some rescanning to get everything at high resolution, and we'll be putting more selections there as we can. One of our initiatives for 2021 is to purchase a new collections management database that will allow better access and search capabilities for our digitized collections. So I think we'll probably wait until we have that up and running, and then we look forward to adding more from all of our collections onto our website. In the meantime, we do have a pretty decent selection of some of Wally's early work available in the highlights for you to browse on our website right now. Um, Martin O'Toole asks if we can see a difference in quality between Abbey's medium format work and his 35mm work, and if he was really more inspired in one format than another. And just for the size of the negatives, the medium format work that he did with the Rolleiflex are just beautiful files. They scan beautifully. We're able to get all kinds of information and detail and resolution out of those files. The 35mm are quite good, and we got some nice enlargements out of them too, but they're just not quite as nice files as we can scan from the medium format files. And I think he really, from my experience at least, I think he really kind of mastered that Rolleiflex camera, and really, I think having the fixed lens and using that for a single perspective for so many of his shots taken at Trains magazine and in his early days of PR work, it just seemed like he really knew that instrument well and knew how to get the most out of it. Certainly with some of his interchangeable lens cameras at 35mm, that expanded his creativity in both directions. So I get the sense that Wally was, happy to experiment in different camera formats, and did some good work in all of them. These were all tools for him, I think, but certainly his Rollie was one that I think he did some really great work with. Oren asks if the center could ever do an anthology of Abbey's writing alongside his photographs. I don't even know if we have enough of his writing outside of a little bit of the Soo Line and the Milwaukee Road stuff. Kevin, are you able to respond to that one at all?
Well, I mean, you could certainly put together an Abbey reader of stuff he wrote for Trains, which I would suggest, is probably the best stuff to go with, because he was operating as an independent, free will journalist in that sense, as opposed to a public relations capacity. And I don't mean that as a criticism of PR at all, but Wally was a top shelf magazine writer at that point in his career, and so that would also yield you the most variety, because he was covering the Alphabet route and the Western railroads and the Santa Fe and other stuff he was doing. And you mentioned the New York Harbor stuff. He wrote a wonderful piece about a very cold winter night when he was working in the tower at Mayfair, where the Milwaukee crossed the Northwestern during one of his stints as a college kid. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Warren's onto something there. It would be a great idea. The folks at Kalmbach, they ought to do it.
I like that idea. Let's see. So, well, this is just an interesting little tidbit right here. But Patrick Buter is tuned in tonight. Said that the second computer data center shot in the Soo Line chapter shows an IBM 1401 system, which came out in 1960. And they have two restored 1401s at the Computer History Museum for demonstrations, which is in Mountain View, California. So if you're ever out in Mountain View and you want to see a 1401 in action, you can do it there. So I never cease to be amazed by the breadth and the depth of knowledge of our attendees. So right. Thank you, Patrick, for sharing that with us. That's really great to know.
That's really cool. I'd love to know if the 1401 can sing Daisy, if you know it.
Well, and Kevin, to your point, Martha also chimed in and said that they have a lot of Wally's writing and would love an anthology, that he himself had started a book called Call for Signals, that he saw as a collection of his stories. And boy, I sure like that title.
Yeah, that's great.
Maybe we could have another another publishing project down the road for you there, Kevin. Let's see if I missed anything on the chat or the Q&A. Oh, Todd Halamka, one of our board members, hi Todd, asked if Wally photographed any other subject matter beyond railroads that may have influenced his railroad photography.
Gee, better check your emails from Martha on that. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure, I know he took a lot of great family pictures. I used to get the family, the Abbey Christmas letter, or it was like a newsletter. I think it was called the Abbey Astonisher, which was, it was nice to see that Wally had the same penchant for alliteration that his partner Dave Morgan had, and there was a lot of cool photographs in there. I'm sure he was doing other stuff, but I don't know what it would have been.
No, I know in the collection, I mean, we did come across some family photographs. There was some airline photography in there from some of his airplane trips. Occasional scenic photographs from, tours and, stuff around Niagara Falls and Chicago and New York. So, definitely, and I'm sure as a, as a journalist in college and in his first job, working at the newspaper in Kansas afterwards, I think he would have certainly done some more general interest photography. Maybe it's not part of our collection at the center, but certainly something he had an eye for, and especially his people work. I'm sure was influenced, by things outside the railroad community. But he
Right.
certainly brought a great eye for that to his railroad work, and I think that's a real strength of his collection. Oh, and Kevin, to your question about what music the 1401 can play, Patrick says they have a variety of music that it can play. No computer audio, so it uses an AM radio held near the CPU, or does it by the sound of the printer chain.
Oh, okay. Well,
So,
when I get down to Mountain View, I'll have to go see that. That would be interesting.
absolutely, I think we've got a little field trip in our future once the world events will allow us to do things like that again. Well, let's see. I think I've caught all the questions that came in on the chat and on the Q&A. If I missed anything, you can ping us right now. If you haven't had a chance yet, the book is available for purchase. I swear I'll stop harping about that now. But it really came out nicely. It was good to partner with Indiana on that project. Really, kind of one of the first of our sort of modern publishing program at the center that helped us spread our wings a little bit for some of our later projects that we've done on our own for some of our other collections. So Abby really helped us pave the way for that as well. And Kevin, any closing remarks on your end?
Well, nothing really other to say that this was a lot of fun tonight. Of course, it's always fun to
Sure
talk
was.
about Wally, and it was great to know of some of our friends that were along the channel with us tonight, including Martha,
Yeah.
who I communicate with almost every day. So that was a lot of fun. No, I'm just very grateful that I had this chance to be involved in kind of wrapping up in a way Wally's legacy, because getting to know him briefly during my time at Trains was really, I got to know a lot of people. That was just one of the fortunate parts of the job, and getting to know Wally was right up there. I mean, that was getting to know kind of a hero of mine. So I feel real privileged in that regard.
No, it was a great privilege for me too. I mean, I was much too young to see Wally's work when it was published in Trains initially, so I was not familiar with his photography before I came to the center. And for me, it was a great chance to discover a great railroad photographer that I'd never known about. So it was, it's a great pleasure for me too, and I've certainly drawn inspiration from looking at his photographs, especially his journalistic approach to people. I mean, his stuff is it resonates as strongly today as it did the day he shot it. It's really, I mean, it's timeless work, and we're sure proud to have it in our collection at the center.
Very much so. Yes.
Well, my dog has, well, I've exhausted her patience. She is telling me it is time to open up the door and, and get into the rest of the house. So I think I'm going to have to sign off for tonight. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Kevin, for
Thank
it's
you,
great,
Scott, and
always great
Haley.
chatting with you.
Thanks for all the
Yeah,
great work.
no, thanks for the great work behind the scenes. And join us. Our next show is going to be Wednesday, January 6th to kick off the new year. That will be my show with Victor Hand's photography from Hokkaido, Japan, which he took chasing steam in the 1960s and 70s. I lived there as an English teacher from 2005 to 2007. Our paths crossed a few times, and I thought it would be fun to go back through and look at Victor's photographs and do a little bit of then and now studies with those. That'll be coming up on January 6th. We'll have registrations available on our website soon. In the meantime, happy holidays, everyone. Very happy new year, a happier new year. Let us hope for in 2021. And we'll certainly do our best at the center to keep bringing you great programming and showcasing some of the wonderful collections that we have. So much to look forward to there, and stay safe out there, and we'll see you next year.
So long, folks.
Thanks, everybody.